Okay, I put it all back together and tested it, and it was still slipping. So I've taken it all apart again to find out what's going wrong this time, and another cogwheel is slipping. This finger is on this crank which turns this cogwheel, and if you watch you'll see it's turning it okay, but if you're really careful and push and sort of jam up these cogs, which is very hard to do with one hand, you actually start to get a slip in that wheel. Okay, I've set the camera up pretty crudely just to demonstrate that this shaft here is spinning on here. As you can see, I'll turn that round. The shaft's meant to be locked on to that. So again, what I'm going to do is clean it up and make sure I get it in the right position and sweat it on. I'm using the word sweat. What that involves doing is it's just using a soft solder. You get it to the right temperature, you flux it in here, and just touch your solder against it gently and it will go inside. Okay, I'm going to attempt to show you how I do this soldering. Hopefully this will come out. I'm just going to use normal electrical solder. That way it doesn't go crazy, doesn't drip everywhere, and a little bit of the old plumber's flux or lead flux. Again, you've got to be careful with this stuff, it burns your hands. It's caustic, and you want to be very careful how much of it you spread around, otherwise you end up getting a right mess of everything. So what I'm doing is I'm using this pin punch just to put a few dabs around here, which when I heat it up will get into the cracks. Now I've already cleaned this thoroughly, and I used a carburetor cleaner. I find that the most suitable thing for doing this because it does actually penetrate into the cracks. It's easier than kerosene, it's cleaner than kerosene. It does smell, you should use it in a ventilated area. I'm using this brand here. You can use any one. Make sure you thoroughly clean it up, make sure it's thoroughly out of the air before you light up your blowtorch, or you can have yourself an explosion. Do this at your own risk. I'm just going to use a standard blowtorch, old school. Do not be tempted to use the old map gas stuff like this, because it will melt the brass and you're buggered. But I'm just going to actually use this to light my blowtorch because I can't be bothered to get my flint starter out of the cupboard. Alright. Hopefully you can still hear me. I'm just going to apply a gentle bit of heat onto this. Turn it around a few times. Don't want to get it too hot. Okay, and dirt's starting to come out from inside as the flux goes in. I'm going to touch my solder on there and wait for it to take. That's hot. Alright, just let that cool off. Then I'll clean up on the lathe in a minute. Okay, pretty bad lighting in this part of the workshop, but I've got it in the lathe. What I'm going to do now is just clean up the surface here, just enough so that the brass collar here rubs nicely against the bronze bushing in the motor. We want to clean this solder off. Now it's absolutely attached to the shaft again, and that's what we wanted. Okay, a bit more light on it now. What I've done, I've just turned it down to where it should be and just cleaned up the shaft a bit. Now I'm going to reinstall it, but you can see here now that ain't slipping on the shaft at all. That's absolutely rock solid. Just a tip when you're putting these things back together, these are little oil pads. They're meant to be soaked in oil, and the idea is that they'll lubricate the pinion on the first gear. So what I use is the old light machine oil or Singer oil, which is, I use Singer oil because it's cheap, it's easily available, and it's never let me down. You're going to get all those people out there going, oh no, you shouldn't use that, but I don't know why. You ask them why. Anyway, this is hard to do with one hand again, but basically what you've got to do is just keep dropping it in to the felt pad on that side, and where's my hand to get out of the way, on that side there, until it stops soaking in. Okay, it's all back together again now. Just we're going to quickly test it and make sure it works before we put everything back together. That is absolutely rock solid now, not moving at all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to test it on 15 volts instead of the 24 volts it's meant to have. That way, if it is running under strain, it will stall. So let's see what she does. That's fine that way, and obviously reverse the polarity and she's going to run that way. Okay, and she's nice and tight. What I'm going to do now is pop it back together and fix up this mess that someone calls a soldering job. Everything else seems to be okay with the connectors, so it's just a case of heat shrinking that and well, resoldering it and heat shrinking it. Just a note on reassembly, make sure whatever you do that this is set out the way I have set it out here. So you've got to have your grub screw going in here to the flat surface of this shaft. You have the thicker end of this crank here this way, you have this facing that way. It's pinned, yours might be screwed, or it might be screwed and pinned. Now here there is a little chunk cut out of that, and that's there for a reason, and that reason is if you connect power up to this in any other configuration, it will hit on itself and it will jam the gearbox and it probably will pull the cogwheel off, and that's probably why we had the problem in the first place. It should be able to run perfectly round and round and round without having to stop at all. Right, it's all back together now. I fixed up that dodgy wiring job and heat shrunk that under there. I put a bit of loose heat shrink there to help protect the wires as he comes in and out of the playfield. Otherwise they just rub and eventually become bare. I've fixed up the dodgy soldering on the motor there and heat shrunk that. Just something to note, this crank here was being put on the wrong way round. What I mean by that is it was 180 degrees the other way, so that flat bit there was actually facing upwards, where in fact it should face downwards if you follow the manual, and the screws should come in from the bottom. When I received this, the screws were coming in from the top, which made it very difficult to take things hand off or thing off, because you actually had to unbolt his metal bracket that goes through his hand to reach the screw heads there. So when that's in that position, that should be in that position. When this is reinstalled, there's a few fine adjustments to do. These screws, 1, 2 and the third one up there, can be loosened off and allows a little bit of play backwards and forwards. Also, when the optos are put on, you need to adjust them so that he operates. So you need to set your machine into test mode for thing, and just play around with it until he's doing what he's meant to be doing properly. A job like this normally takes 2.5 to 3.5 hours, depending on what you find inside. This guy was lucky. Sometimes we have to cut new cogwheels, sometimes the gearbox is so badly gone it's just not worth trying to repair it. I do keep a lot of stock of spare bits and pieces for similar types of gearboxes, and I have the ability to cut up the gears necessary to fix most of these things. I'm based in Melbourne. If I can be of any help to you at all, please feel free to drop me a line. Thanks for watching.